now. I think it's a good opportunity now to open the floor for your questions. So yes, if there's a question, please raise your hand. The first hand up was you. Please identify your affiliation and name. Thank you very much. I'm from a Geopolitical Institute of Japan. Masashi Okuyama is my name, and I have, well, not necessarily a question, but a comment on a more political note. Just the other day, all of a sudden, Edward Luttwak, a strategist, asked me to come to a spa, onsen, in Japan, and asked me to interview him. I didn't stay in the same room with him in the hotel. I like women better than men. Well, that's besides the point. Now, so what he wanted to say or emphasize in the interview was action versus reaction. Strategy is action and reaction. So Prime Minister Abe has tried to pass this legislation on security. So Japan took the action, or maybe a reaction, but in the context of bilateral relationship between Japan and the United States, one outcome was achieved. Now, in return, the U.S. side, and this is very politically sensitive perhaps, but the U.S. side, is there any kind of a reaction that the U.S. side can take? Admiral Blair, Admiral O'Connor, well, John McCain says he likes straight talk. So if you can provide us with your straight talk, your candid opinions, I would appreciate it. Thank you. So Admiral Blair, maybe?
Well, I think that the Chinese strategy in the South China Sea is a complete loser. In return for alienating the maritime countries of Southeast Asia and many other countries because of their aggressive actions, they are gaining a small number of indefensible, faraway islands which are of no use in wartime, and they are building a tremendous anti-Chinese network which they're going to have to deal with. So I don't really understand China's strategy. I thought the Chinese were generally smarter than this, but I think they are managing to form a coalition against their interests in a very effective fashion.
すみません、日本がアメリカ側が
Well, I'm talking about the Japan. Okay, so U.S. side, what is your reaction to the Japanese legislation, the new legislation on security?
A nice start.
アーコインさんはすみません。
How about Admiral Alcoin?
As far as the new legislation, we are very much looking forward to working with Japan closer. We have a very good relationship with JMSDF, and while it is strong, I think we can do more because, as was mentioned in previous briefs, there is a capacity issue. In the Pacific, we have the tyranny of distance, and our ships cannot always be where they need to be. So being able to be interoperable, being able to refuel other countries' ships or fly into different air bases will only help us better help make this region secure. So I very much like the legislation and would like to see what the JMSDF can do further. But I think it is a good start.
I don't know if, as a moderator, I should respond to that. I was in Washington for 3 months since July, and regarding this legislation of security. There were many sessions. And CSIS, there has been no think tank sessions on this law. So not the fact that the legislation has passed in the Diet, but what is to be done in the future is more important. Now, if you have any more questions, the floor is yours. How about Dr. Auer?
My name is Jim Auer. I'm a over 70 years old farmer from Tennessee, where there's very few oceans. But during the Cold War, I spent a lot of time in the Western Pacific. And despite the fact that the Soviet Union built a huge naval presence, 100 submarines in their Pacific fleet alone, and some 3,000 aircraft, the combination of the self-defense fleet and the U.S. 7th Fleet had a virtually constant monitor surveillance capability over the Sea of Japan and the Philippine Sea. Do Japan and the United States have the requisite level of capability to provide that kind of surveillance monitoring in the East China Sea and South China Sea today? And if we do and aren't doing it, is it because of political unwillingness to do so, or is it just that the capability itself is not great enough? Thank you.
それではアコイン司令官お願いいたします。
Now, Admiral Akkoin, please.
And I remember back to those days, I was a junior officer and we had tremendous capability, and we still do. We have, there was some discussion about whether the United States underestimates the threat in this region, and we do not. And that's why we are moving 60% of our forces to this area. And it's just not our run-of-the-mill forces. It's our frontline best technology. That's why the Ronald Reagan arrived here this last week. And that's why the air wing on board is an all Super Hornet air wing. And that's why our best destroyers, our baseline 9 destroyers, which have a tremendous capability, are not going to the Atlantic. They are coming here to the Pacific for these threats. But specifically the ISR, it was said that we underestimate the Chinese threat. We know what they are doing. We have very good ISR. I would think where I am stretched thin is sometimes on capacity. Some of our assets, some of our ship ISR assets are getting old and need quite a bit of maintenance. But it's overall, whether it's surface, air, space, subsurface, our ISR is, we know what's going on in this region.
Thank you very much. 実は今
Something related to Mr. Awa's question is that in the panelist statement, for example, Professor Katsumata said guideline itself is a linchpin to keep U.S. forces in this region. Likewise, Admiral Yamamura said that Japan-U.S. ally itself is a linchpin to keep the maritime forces of the United States in this region. I think the assumption behind that is that maybe U.S. is going to withdraw from Asia, especially given the rebalancing policy. It's not a strategy, but policy. And then policy changes when the administration changes to the next administration or the president. And that's somehow the concept of the Japan side. But for U.S., rebalance in Asia, is that what that is my understanding correct? Or U.S. is not thinking in that way? If you have something to say, Admiral Blair, please.
I think there is virtually unanimous agreement within the leadership of the United States of all political parties executive branch, Congress, those who are out of power, that the center of world power is moving towards East Asia, and that will be the center in future. And that is what is really driving the movement of American interest and, as Admiral Coyne said, American military power to this part of the region. All of us who have served in the armed forces here believe that our job on the military side is simply to keep things quiet so that those activities which benefit all people, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Indonesian, can take place. And those activities have to do with improvements in economy, countries raising their standard of living, more person-to-person communication among nations. Over the course of my career, as I was out on the bridge of my ships around Japan, further south, the amount of commercial civilian traffic just grew and grew every time I was out there. More container ships, more car carriers, more bulk carriers, more fishermen, and that's good. That's good. In our gray hulls, we want to keep in the background and just provide a strong deterrent foundation so that that sort of activity can exist. I don't think that basic plan has changed any. Now China, growing powerful, feels that it has endured 100 and something years of humiliation, felt that it was taken advantage of by European countries, by the United States, by Japan. Now that it's more powerful, it's time for it to gain more influence, perhaps more territory. And we have to deal with that Chinese development. But the way to deal with it is to set up a series of diplomatic and military balances so that China cannot take advantage of gray zone situations, so that China understands how far it can go to accommodate China's legitimately greater influence and power in many areas, and to keep our eye on the ball, which is raising the living standards and the prosperity and the quality of life of all people in the region. To me, that's what Asia is about. That's what the American Rebalance is about. And that, frankly, is what all of our military activities should be about.
Thank you very much. The rebalance is probably a comprehensive policy. It's not just about military force, but it includes the military power as necessary force. And sometimes only military force can cope with the threat, but some threats can be dealt with a non-military power. So China, which is advancing quite rapidly, is giving a pressure, but probably, as Admiral Blair has said, because of the global shift, U.S. has been focusing on the area that it has been focusing recently. Now going back to the floor, I would like to accept questions. Noboru Yamaguchi, sir, please. My name is Yamaguchi International University. I used to belong to the self-defense force, but ground self-defense force. But my younger sister and my son work for maritime defense force. So although I'm from ground self-defense force, I'm deserve to be here, I think. And I'm interested in maritime security, actually. And now, in the Gulf of Aden, maritime self-defense force has been engaging itself in anti-piracy activities And in March next year, the legislation will be promulgated, security legislation, and the condition to use forces will be eased, and the self-defense forces will have more options. But and is there any urgent matters or urgent changes necessary? Well, I think it's too harsh to ask this to Admiral Yamamura, so I would ask Admiral Yoshida or Professor Jimbo or Professor Katsumata. But in any case, I'd like to have opinions from Japanese panelists on this matter. Thank you. I regret that I appointed you as a question asker. We are the same alumni from the National Defense Academy, but anyway, I'd like to refrain from responding to your question, but I think Admiral Yamamura is good enough to answer your question. So Admiral Yamamura, please go ahead. Oh, I was caught as a surprise, but thank you very much for your worry, but I don't think I can answer to your question in a concrete way. But what should we do in the future? Well, we all think about that, and what I can say in my position is that we will do whatever we have to do. And the government and the country, the government is thinking thoroughly about that. That's the only thing I can say at this moment. Is that all right? Then Professor Katsumata, please.
Thank you very much. I think this is a really difficult question for me to answer, but there has been some misunderstanding concerning this new legislation, particularly with regard to international operations. This may not directly answer to your question, General Yamaguchi, but the going to the support and protect the other forces or civilians to faraway places. So some believe that such an operation will become possible immediately with this new security legislation. But what kind of international security or peace missions would be given to the self-defense forces? So the answer depends on that. So the security legislation doesn't mean whether such an operation will become immediately possible for the self-defense forces. Thank you. Perhaps we can entertain one last question now. I can't see your face. I can see only your hand. Well, Professor Murai, if I were able to see your face, I wouldn't ask you to take the floor. Thank you very much. Murai of Tokyo International University. Professor Jimbo is good at provoking others, and the same goes for me. So I have a question. Because of the time limitation, I ask only one question. The Admiral Akoin, I have a question to you. Professor Katsumata previously argued that the common enemy of the alliance has changed. During the Cold War, the adversary was the Soviet Union, but today our common adversary, is China. Environment has changed today. The American forces used to have certain expectations, for example, anti-submarine warfare and the anti-mine operations. But with the change of the adversary and with the change of the security environment, is your expectation has changed as well towards the maritime security, the Japanese forces? For example, the aircraft carrier, well, the position by Japan of aircraft carrier would have been were regarded as redundant by the American forces. But do you think that that view has changed since the end of the Cold War and since the change of a common adversary? I appreciate the specific answers from you, if possible.
じゃあお願いします。
So, Admiral Arcoin, please.
I'm not sure if I got quite all of that, but I'll go ahead and give it a try. I wouldn't call China the main adversary. There are a number of threats to security in this region. How China is acting is worrisome, as well as other countries, North Korea and also Russia in the Pacific region. So we are looking across the board, being prepared. We have allies that we have agreed that we will defend, and we have to be able to do that in all domains. And it's not just the carrier in the surface, but also submarine, subsurface, aircraft, space, and cyber. It really gives us a tremendous amount of opportunity how we will defend our allies in the region. While the carrier may have to stand off for some periods of time, we have other capabilities that we exercise so that the threat has changed. It has gotten more modern. The threat is not just China. There are a multitude of threats, and that's why we like to exercise with the different countries in the region so that we're prepared to address these security threats or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief.
どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Yes, I greatly appreciate the very candid questions and the very candid answers. The time is pressing, unfortunately, so we need to conclude the morning program, the discussion session. In July, I went to the Washington, D.C. this year, learning again a lot, a great deal. On the 23rd of July, the Foreign Relations, the committee, or the East Asia subcommittee of the American Senate, Mr. Cronin, seen us, made a statement, delivered a statement, and he said that the large-scale warfare is rather inconceivable, but small-scale conflicts and tensions are constantly possible in this part of the world, and the United States would go in between war and peace, and this is an uncomfortable situation. But unfortunately, the United States have to go into this direction in this uncomfortable situation. In the last 2 years of my career as an active officer in Sasebo, I was also prepared my unit for such uncertainties. So the common goal for Japan and the United States is to bring and maintain security, stability in the Asia-Pacific region. So this is exactly what our mission is and the essence of our mission. Thank you very much indeed. This concludes the first part of today's program.